afternoon, and welcome to yet another very, very provocative, very timely and topical EMET webinar. We are extremely honored to have back to us today as a return guest, Sarit Zehavi, who is the founder and CEO of the incredibly important Alma Center for Research and Education. Sarit lives and works in the north of Israel on the borders of Syria and Lebanon. And what she has done with her life is, to me, nothing short of heroic. She has dedicated her life to watching what is going on with the tunnels of Hezbollah, the movements of Hezbollah in Syria, and all of their nefarious activities down to minute detail. She's really an expert. She was Lieutenant Colonel in the IDF, and she constantly gives her valuable research to the IDF and consults with many people. Many members of Congress have gone up north and have met with Sarit and have been educated by her remarkable work. And before I introduce her today, I would like to say that tomorrow evening, all of us are sitting down for the festival of Pesach, of Passover. And we call Pesach, among other things, Chag HaCherut, the Festival of Freedom. And it is because of people like Sarit and her work with the IDF that we are a free people today. So thank you so much, Sarit. And now if you can give us an update of some of the work of Alma and what's going on Israel's borders and Syria and Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm truly honored to be with you today. One word about Alma Center. So we have been publishing a lot of reports about what is going on in Syria and Lebanon and the Iranian involvement in the region. Some of these reports that I will present today were probably upset a little bit Hezbollah, and we became kind of a target to Hezbollah. They respond, and they respond with a video and with some articles, putting our faces in this and our accurate location in Israel, the same way we pointed at their accurate locations, missiles locations in Beirut. So just, to give you a sense of where we are and, how personal this is for us, I thought to begin with a video that we just took last week when we went to the border. I went with a good friend, and we were standing. I just wanted to show him a place that I knew there is a Hezbollah flag, and we stopped with the car next to the Lebanese border. You can see in the yellow, it's Hezbollah flag, and next to the flag, you can see a person standing. This is a Hezbollah operative that is actually taking photos of us and of the IDF position nearby, which of course I didn't take photo of the IDF position. So this is like a small taste of how it is, and this place is positioned a few meters from a community named Shtula at the border. There are many communities which are based at the fence at the border. So this session is an update, and I think the most important update we can talk of today is the tension that is happening on the border between Israel and Syria, and between Israel and Lebanon, actually the tension between Israel and Hezbollah, and maybe even between United States and Iran. And it's all connected because Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. And actually, it's very specific. Since last July, there is like an open tap between Israel and Hezbollah, since Hezbollah combatant was killed in Syria. Probably he was securing some of the warehouses that Israeli is targeting in Syria in the past decade. And this is very unusual. The Hezbollah operative is being killed, and the attack was immediately attributed to Israel, and Hezbollah promised response in a sense that made the IDF change its procedures and daily routine along the borderline. And in a sense that Hezbollah tried a few times in the past few months to carry out attacks against the IDF soldiers. This is, for example, some mines that were planted next to IDF position in the Syrian border. This is a video when IDF succeeded in targeting Iranian proxy. These are Syrian locals, but they are Iranian proxies that came and put a mine inside a bag next to the border fence. This is the border fence in the video. And then when they went back into Syria, IDF managed to kill them. In a minute, you'll see this. Well, in the Lebanese side, you can see on the right, these are rifles that were found listed as an IDF soldier, and rifles that were found in Shiva farms. This is the northern part of the Israeli-Lebanese border after a try of Hezbollah combatants to carry out an attack against IDF soldiers there. The same rifle is being used in the war in Syria. These are Austrian rifles. They were manufactured in Austria and they were exported to Iran about 15 years ago. And Iran supplied them to Hezbollah. That's the change of supply over here in the Middle East that is happening every day. And we are trying to fight every day. So if we speak about an update, I think the main question that everybody's asking is it going to be war? You know, we say war in the summer or war in the winter or war in the fall, and everybody's speaking about war. And what is the interest of Hezbollah or Iran or even Israel? Are any of us interested in war? And there is a debate between the researchers, and I will share with you the different views, because some are saying that Hezbollah and Iran are not interested in war. Hezbollah because it is involved in the internal issues in Lebanon. The situation inside Lebanon is really difficult. The collapse, it's the collapse of the sovereign Lebanese state. There is no sovereign Lebanese state anymore. The economic situation is really bad. Last week I had a visit at Alma Center of an ex-Lebanese who is living today in Israel, and we talked a little bit about the internal situation in Lebanon, and I told him, is there any hope that one day we will be able to eat hummus in Beirut together? And he said, Sarit, there is hope because the hunger will win against Hezbollah. And it's a very nice sentence, the hunger will win against Hezbollah. But is it true? Will the hunger wins against Hezbollah? Is there hunger in Lebanon? I'm not sure, because Hezbollah is playing a very sophisticated game. On the one hand, providing the population with the medicines and a little bit of food that they need, but on the other hand, not enabling Lebanon to prosper, and Lebanon is suffering from lack of dollars, for no functioning economy, no manufacturing, no innovation, no industry, a lot of corruption from all leaderships. Doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's the Christian, Shiite, or Sunni leadership. Everybody are corrupted in this. I totally agree with the Lebanese. And that's why eventually it was very easy for Iran by Hezbollah to take over the state. And again, I'm going back to the question, so what's the interest of Hezbollah, since Hezbollah is so busy with the internal issues of Lebanon, with the internal criticism against it in Lebanon? Maybe it is not interested in war, or maybe the opposite is right. In 2006, by the way, there was a lot of pressure, internal pressure against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hezbollah carried out a terrorist attack and kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers from the Israeli side of the border, what actually caused to the opening of the war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006. What's the conclusion of everything I've said? So my understanding, and that's my humble understanding, because as I've said, not everybody agree. Even in Alma Center, we have some disagreements within the researchers. That Hezbollah is not interested in war, because war, it's truly a lot of risks. But Hezbollah is interested in what the IDF calls days of battles, meaning to raise the tension on the borderline with Israel, weaken the Israeli spirit, if you like, trying to make our lives in the north. And I'm speaking to you here about 9 miles from the Israeli-Lebanese border, trying to make our life unbearable, and they tried, as I've said, they are doing a lot of provocations on the border, not dangerous provocations, but to try to intimidate us. And as I've said, they tried a few times to carry out terrorist attacks against the IDF soldiers. And again, it's terrorist attacks against IDF soldiers. I believe it is, but not everybody agree with me, and I understand. But in any case, they are more willing to walk on Israel's red lines than in the past, and they are not interested in all-out war, but maybe they are interested in a little bit of raising the tension here, and no doubt that they are capable of doing a lot of damage to Israel. And I think this is the main risk. The main risk is if these kind of days of battle or killing of IDF soldiers with these weapons that I've shown you will deteriorate, you know, action, reaction, and eventually deteriorate into war. So everybody agree, and it doesn't matter whether we think Hezbollah is interested in days of battle or in peace or in war or whatever. Everybody here agrees that upon the capabilities of Hezbollah, which I think that's the main problem. Hezbollah today is holding more than 100,000 rockets, and some even say 150,000 rockets. I'll tell you a small secret, it really depends how you count, whether you count mortars, whether you count shells, how exactly do you count artilleries. But bottom line is, it's a lot of rockets, it's a lot of artilleries. They can cause a lot of damage. Iron Dome is not enough. I hope everybody knows what Iron Dome is online, right, Sarah? And some of them, very few of them, not too many, probably tens of them, we don't know exactly, are PGMs, precision guided missiles. While Hezbollah and Iran invested a lot of resources in trying to make these thousands of rockets to create like factories of precision guided missiles project, to make these regular rockets much more accurate, to cause much more danger and risks to the Israelis. IDF evaluation is that this project failed thanks to what IDF was doing in Syria. But actually, after IDF was operating against this project in Syria, Hezbollah understood very quickly and transferred some of these factories to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, it's much more of a problem because it's inside civilian areas. And over there, any attack against these factories may cause collateral damage, which brings us to something that Alma Center did. We trace actually in the internet, in Wikimedia, a database of tens of Hezbollah missile sites in Beirut. In a minute, I'll share a screen with you. I'll show you. Of course, I must say that IDF intelligence or IDF in general doesn't need Alma Center to tell him where the missiles are. And when we have found this in open sources, and it was in open sources, we were surprised because it is highly secret. And the first thing we had done was to try to understand the information and to analyze it and to ask the question whether it makes sense, that there are missiles in the specific areas, whether it makes sense that somebody will actually try to expose it. And our assessment was that it does make sense. And we analyzed each of them, and we even succeeded in finding connection between the civilian infrastructure and the military infrastructure. And the best example is the one here in the middle, which is actually named Burj al-Barajne. Burj al-Barajne is an area, but it is also an association, Hezbollah association, that educational association that you can see in the photo here, schools and some football yards, and all of these are Hezbollah schools. But nearby Hezbollah schools, you see the red spots. These are the spots that we have found in the database in Wikimedia. By the way, part of the assumption that this database is accurate because the person who uploaded the database did everything he can to make sure that nobody would know who he is, using various IPs. Some of the information was also used by Netanyahu in the UN, so we understand that we are not the only one who evaluate this information as accurate. And that's only part of the reasons why we believe that's accurate. And here you see the connection. It's very natural for Hezbollah to use its own assets, that these are assets of civilian infrastructure that actually provides services to the population and make them military assets. And I'm not saying that the rockets are inside, because I assume that the rockets are inside, because the information that we have found talked about launchers, and not launching sites in these areas. Launching sites could be the football area, could be the parking lot between the schools, because you usually need a small open area between the buildings, between the crowded building area, to be able of taking out the launchers and the missiles from the buildings, launching very quickly, and then moving back into the building. So this is example to Burj al Baraj, and you know, if you need another proof that it's a system, it's not you know, just one small example. I want to show you what Soleimani, which I believe all of you heard of, he was the command of Quds Force. He's actually the commander of all the Iranian proxies in the region, and this is what he said about this tactic of the human shield. And he said very clearly, every point, every hill, every village, every house, and every area served as a front line. And I think he meant that this is a year, about a year before he was assassinated, less than a year, a few months before he was assassinated in Iraq. So that's, you know, just an example of how it works, and how, you know, using the civilian sphere for military purposes. But you know, there is a process in order to do so, and the process is a process of indoctrination. Hezbollah is actually involved in order to create this reality of every hill, every village, every house. You should be involved in every aspect of the daily lives of the people. If we take, for example, COVID-19, and we try to understand who is fighting COVID-19 in Lebanon, what we see is that the head of the health office, the minister of the health office in Lebanon, is from Hezbollah. And we see that the main organization that is in the field, providing food, providing tests, providing medical services, is the Islamic organization, which belongs to Hezbollah. And again, just to give you a small example about how indoctrination works, these are Boy Scouts of Hezbollah. There are a lot of Boy Scouts of Hezbollah in South Lebanon. They are standing outside an IDF position at the border, the most western IDF position at the border, not far from the seashore. And what this guy is holding here is holding a photo of Khamenei from Iran. He's not holding a photo of any Lebanese army commander or any Lebanese leader. He's holding a photo of the Iranian leader, and I think this expresses the best. And the sign here, when we try to translate the sign, something looked weird, but then we understood that the sign is in Arabic and in Persian. So again, a small example of how these things work. Now, I talked a lot about the rockets. To wrap things up, more than 100,000 rockets can get to various ranges in Israel, almost everywhere, not everywhere, but almost everywhere. But actually, Iran, with its involvement in the Middle East, is building its capability to launch rockets, not only from Lebanon, but also from Syria, which in a minute I will focus on, and also from Yemen and from Iraq. And now, just before our conversation, I saw another report, which I still need to check, that there was another attack against an Israeli carrier in the Arab Gulf. So that's why when we try to speak about tension and, you know, terrorist attacks, it's on the borders and elsewhere, you know, in the Middle East, and it's against Israel and against Saudi Arabia and against US, and we are all in this together, like it or not. Yes, we're all in this together. So the artillery is one capability, but I want to mention another capability, which is the tunnels, or I don't, the tunnels is a past capability, and the actual idea is to be capable of crossing the border, entering into Israel, but with brigades, not small, 12 soldiers that kidnapped Israeli soldiers like in 2006, but with brigades of hundreds of combatants that are well experienced from the war in Syria. And then pumping out inside Israel next to a community or next to an IDF position and surprising us Israelis. We are now inside Hezbollah border crossing tunnel that IDF managed, one out of 6 that IDF had found 2 years ago along the borderline with Lebanon. And everything you see behind me, all these pipes, electricity, phone lines, air condition, the stairs themselves, you can see the stairs behind me, the stairs themselves, everything except for the opening on the Israeli side was made by Hezbollah. The tunnel was almost fully operational because Hezbollah stopped about 10 meters below the ground, and IDF had to dig down in order to find the tunnel. The camera was walking by a white pipe like that. In a minute you'll see it again. A white pipe, which is actually the only thing which is Israeli in the sites you see now. This white pipe is the pipe that actually traced the tunnel, because in order to find the tunnel, IDF had to, dig with white pipes again and again, every few meters, again and again and again, along the borderline in specific areas where IDF had assessments, whether from intelligence or from geologic understanding or operative understanding. All of this together, melt together to one evaluation of where the tunnels are, and then searching for the tunnels. You can see the white pipe now below the ground. This tunnel is about 22 stories deep. Imagine a 22 stories building deep and half a mile long. The opening in the Lebanese side is in a Shiite town, which is positioned, of course, very close to the border between Israel and Lebanon. So now, okay, so they lost the tunnels. That's great. But if you come to Israel, and I hope you will be able to see that the borderline between Israel and Lebanon is I don't want to say forested, because it's forested in Middle Eastern terms. We don't have forest like what you have in the United States, but there are a lot of trees and bushes where to hide, and hills and valleys. So you can enter, and in the past few months we are experiencing infiltrations from Lebanon of Sudani foreign workers that are running away from the economic crisis in Lebanon and trying to get into Israel, and they are being caught again and again and again, either by the IDF or by the Lebanese army before crossing into Israel. And there is always the question whether these workers received help from Hezbollah or gave help to Hezbollah when they tried to cross, and actually while following the crossing, Hezbollah could learn about IDF response, about where are the best places to try to cross, etc. So you see, even if we have a fence, and in some of the areas we have a wall, this is not enough. Okay, I want to say a few words about Syria. I think it's important. So I want to move on to Syria. And again, the same method of the connection between the civilian wing and the military wing is now being adapted in southern Syria, while Iran is establishing associations that some of them also have a militia connected to them, and that are providing, I'll skip that, that are providing social services, indoctrination, economic aspects of like investments, or working with key players with providing food and supply to the population, etc. And all in all, this creates the same idea, like in Lebanon, of getting more and more involved in the population and actually creating this ground corridor much more effective. And you can see Tehran on my map, and you see the routes, which are true routes. This is not a simulation. These are the routes that we have found in the terrain from Tehran to Syria, and then from Syria into Beirut, into Lebanon. While actually, when you are establishing yourself in this area in southern Lebanon next to the Israeli border, it makes it much more easier. You don't need to go all the way to Beirut. You can cross and get straight to the Israeli border from the Golan. There is only one problem, which is Tanaf border crossing, where the Americans in blue are, and I hope they will not disappear from there, because that's why this southern route is still closed. I'm not going to get to all these details here. It's too sophisticated, and later on I will put some links to the reports that we have written, but I just want to say one word. You see Iranian budgets, sometimes it's also UN budgets. We trace the leaders of these associations, and we've seen connections between the leaders to local militias that are also funded by Iran. We see connections between the association and Hezbollah, and we see connections between the figures, the leaders themselves, and Iranian leadership, which is based like the ambassadors or the embassy, which is based in Damascus. So this is how the mechanism works. You know what, I'll just put in the chat, I'll put in the chat the full report. All this is actually enabling the Iranians to create local militias, local Sunni. There are Sunnis in this region. They're not Shiites like in South Lebanon. But again, a process of indoctrination, of demographic change. I don't know whether there will be Sunnis there in 10 years. Taking the local militias that 2 years ago were fighting against the government, were fighting against ISIS, were fighting against Iran, and buying them, and now they are loyal to the Shiite proxy of Iran. That's one thing. And another deployment is the deployment of Hezbollah itself with 2 units. One, and as you can see in my map, one is the Southern Command Unit, which is connected to the Syrian army. It is actually training the Syrian army. And the other one is the Golan File, which is its mission is to carry out and plan terrorist attacks against Israel from the Golan into Israel. And these are their positions over here, again, with one of the reports that we have made recently. I'm putting the link to the report in a minute in the chat.
Okay, excellent. So the first question that I have for you is part question, part request. You know that UN Security Council Resolution 1701 says that all foreign forces have got to leave Lebanon. And of course, this came about in 2006 after the Lebanese-Israeli war. And Israel, of course, was very, very careful to withdraw every single IDF soldier from southern Lebanon. Unfortunately, as we can see, Iran, via its puppet Hezbollah, has totally implanted itself there. And we have in America given, I think it is $1.9 billion over the years since 2006 to the Lebanese armed forces for the purpose of making sure that they are the sole army within southern Lebanon. My question is, to what extent has the Lebanese armed forces been infiltrated by Hezbollah, and who is actually subservient to whom? And my request is, if you have any documentation, you could please give us, because as you know, we work on Capitol Hill, and we need to pass this on to the appropriate committees when it comes to the next fiscal year's appropriations. Okay.
So while I'm speaking, I will try to trace our report about the connection between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah, and I will say a few words about that. The Lebanese army is not subordinate to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not subordinate to the Lebanese army. they live in coexistence. And this is very important to say. In the point of view of many Lebanese, especially those who support Hezbollah, and I'm very careful with saying de-Lebanese, because there is no de-Lebanese. It's okay. It's okay that you have a Lebanese army, and next to it you have the mukawama. Mukawama is the word, the Arabic word for resistance. And you actually have a state with two armies. That one is the Lebanese army, subordinate to the Lebanese government, and the other one is Hezbollah, who is actually subordinate to Iran. And in the eyes of Hezbollah, there is no problem. They can live together. And those who are against Hezbollah in Lebanon saying that it's not right, but actually the one who is deciding is Hezbollah, which is saying that's the reality, and this is how it's going to stay. The Lebanese army is no doubt cooperating with Hezbollah. We have seen this again and again and again in South Lebanon. Towers that were built by the Lebanese army along the borderline are used also by Hezbollah combatants to gather information on the IDF. We see them using Lebanese army's vehicles. We see connections. There can be a family where you have somebody serving in the Lebanese army and the other one is serving on Hezbollah. So they are not enemies. They must coexist. It's the same state. Imagine the situation. We've seen, for example, flags in a funeral of a Lebanese army commander that was killed in Syria, and then you see flags of Hezbollah in the funeral. And we've seen them cooperating in the fightings in Irsal, which is on the Syrian-Lebanese border against ISIS 3 years ago. And they won against ISIS, and you could see the Lebanese flag next to Hezbollah flags with Hezbollah combatants below. We've seen, they tweeted, the Hezbollah supporters tweeted, no cooperation between Lebanese army and Hezbollah, ha ha ha. And then you see Lebanese army commander with Hezbollah briefing each other about what's going on in the fightings. My evaluation is that in a future war between Israel and Hezbollah, the Lebanese army will have to participate. And again, the only disagreement in Alma Center is why. So I would say they will have to participate because there is kind of a competition who is the protector of Lebanon. And Tal, the head of the research department in Alma, is saying they will have to participate because they have no choice. The Hezbollah is very well, I don't know, infiltrated into the Lebanese army. No doubt that since Christians are living in Lebanon, Sunnis are living in Lebanon. Last week, an expert to Lebanon who lives there told me everybody leaves. Everybody who can is leaving. So who stays? Those who stay are supporters of Hezbollah, either ideologically or they are poor, they can't leave. And these are the ones that actually recruit either to Hezbollah or to the Lebanese army. And we already see about half of the combatants in Lebanese army are Shiites. So, you know, Lebanon is complicated, but yes, there is cooperation. And any way you want to look at that, the Lebanese army is not the one that will fight Hezbollah, is not the one that will disarm Hezbollah. And if you decide to give assistance to the Lebanese army, don't do that under this assumption, because it's a wrong assumption. You can do it under any other assumptions which we can discuss, but not this one.
Right. Well, you've answered our question, because that is the entire reason for the appropriations to the Lebanese armed forces, is that it will act as a countervailing force, you know, a bulwark against Hezbollah. So, you know, you've answered the question, and we, irrespective of what the motives are for individual Lebanese armed forces fighters to cooperate, and I understand they're in a tough position, yet this is the law. So you've answered our question. Thank you. And any research you could get us about that, I think would be very, very helpful.
I think I put it
perfect.
On the
yeah,
tonight.
Right. Perfect. And I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. I think both Naomi and Hussein are going through the questions, and Benjamin will be reading the questions when they come in. But can you talk a little bit about Jihad al-Bina, the Jihad al-Bina Foundation, and how they're working with the civilians in Lebanon?
Jihad al-Bina is part of many foundations in Lebanon. There are tons of them, of Hezbollah, that are giving services to the population. Specifically, Jihad al-Bina is the one who is giving services that are concerning real estate. It's responsible for the buildings, for all the buildings of Hezbollah, which again, including civilian buildings, schools, mosques, Hassaniyas, which are the yeshiva of the Shiites in South Lebanon. And now it's a new project of Jihad al-Bina, which is the project of what they call the agricultural jihad, trying to encourage people to grow their own food, if you like, in a sense, and help them to do so. So that's basically it. Again, it's just an example. There's many, many more.
That's extremely important now, because after the August 4th explosion in the harbor in Beirut, you know, we realized how hungry people were because they are dependent on imports for most of their food. So, you know, they're brilliant. Hezbollah, both Hezbollah and Hamas, they're brilliant in how they use these charitable organizations to win the hearts and minds of the people. And, you know, we can't underestimate them. So now it's my pleasure to actually introduce Naomi Grant, who is our new director of communications and our office manager, who is he and our wonderful Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who is the head of our program for democracy coming out of the Middle East. We'll be looking at the questions that have come in, and our amazing Benjamin Wheel, who is the director of our program for Israel's national security, will read the questions. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Sarit, for your very, very extensive and knowledgeable presentation about Hezbollah and Iran's influence. The first question we have is, recently Hezbollah sent a delegation to Russia. What was the purpose, and is Russia anticipated to play any significant role inside Lebanon?
Actually, this is the other half of my answer to your question about the Lebanese army. Yes, Russia is interested in gaining more influence, reminding you that its influence in Syria haven't started yesterday, it's decades ago. And there is kind of a competition between Russia and Iran on this region. But again, it's not black and white, it's the Middle East. Everything is gray, though it's very sunny outside usually. So it means that sometimes Russia and Iran are cooperating and helping each other, and sometimes they are competing on the same interests and the same processes. Hezbollah went to Russia. I think, I don't have any information, we don't know, but I guess it was invited to Russia. I guess Russia is involved in the creation of the new government in Syria. And maybe, and there is no, in Lebanon, I'm sorry, there is no government in Lebanon in the past few months. Since the explosion in Beirut, the government resigned and nobody succeeded in finding a new one. There is a new one, but it's actually resigned. So bottom line is there is no functioning government in Lebanon for a few months now. And part of the reason is that they couldn't agree upon how it will be composed and what's the role of Hezbollah in this government should be. And I think this is where Russia is becoming involved. In Russia's point of view, every player is legitimate. It's a different point of view than the United States. And that's why I've said it's another answer to the question about Lebanese army, because I guess that many people in the government are saying, if we would not supply anything to the Lebanese army, and I heard it from the French as well, who will? It will be Russia, it will be Iran, we will not be able to monitor what is actually coming in to the Lebanese army. So you see, everything is connected. Yes, Russia is trying to be much more involved, and if it will serve the interest of Hezbollah, why not? Another superpower that will support them, why not?
And speaking of that, does Hezbollah have any agenda separate than that of Iran?
Great question. Great question. Again, there is a debate between the researchers of Lebanon whether there is a Lebanese Hezbollah or an Iranian Hezbollah. What's the Iranian identity of Hezbollah versus the Lebanese identity of Hezbollah. You can understand from my face that I pretty much don't see eye to eye with this discussion, because I think that Hezbollah lives in peace with both identities. They don't see it as like choosing between Iran and Lebanon, or they don't see any contradiction over here. Iran is the boss of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the employee. And sometimes when Hezbollah see difficulties in the internal arena, and it is not willing to do everything Iran is saying, there is a dialogue. And like you probably, if you're a bosses, you have dialogue with your employees. And if they need a day off and you can't give them the day off, so they will probably work. They will come to work at that day. Or if you decide to give them the day off, even if it's not the best timing. It's the same thing between Hezbollah and Iran. Plus the fact that Hezbollah is fully identified with the Islamic Revolution. Nasrallah himself is a very religious man. He completely believes in his life mission of spreading the Islamic Revolution in Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East. And this is what he's indoctrinating to the Shiites in Lebanon, very successfully in most areas, most Shiite areas, especially in the south. And we are seeing this every day. So they are not choosing. It's for them. It's just can work out together.
And Israel allegedly strikes Iranian shipments of strategic weapons through Syria. How does Israel deal with the current scenario where Iran has been flying these technologies directly into Lebanon?
It is a problem. It didn't start yesterday. These flights directly from Tehran to Lebanon were just revealed recently, but actually it's been going on for a long time. In the past, it was not, including, let's put it this way, including civilian flights. Imagine that you're flying from Tehran to Beirut and you have a rocket below your seat. I think that since there is kind of a balance of deterrent between Israel and Hezbollah in the past 15 years, since 2006, Israel is not willing to attack these shipments as it is doing so in Syria, with a part of the campaign between the wars. What you could see is that IDF is exposing this method and these shipments in the UN. Netanyahu did that a few times. In Alma Center, we thought it's a good idea to expose much more than what the IDF is exposing. And that's why we are working very hard to find more information. And of course, we are doing that under the rules of the censorship in Israel. I don't know if you know, but it's not like in the United States. In Israel, every piece of information that you want to publish that deals with security, you will it should be approved by the censorship. And by the way, until today, they didn't censor anything. We just published everything we wanted.
Does Israel have a realistic plan to quickly knock out the 100,000 plus rockets in Lebanon? Wouldn't any attack on Iran need to deal with this issue as well?
There are contingency plans. We must be, IDF's mission is to postpone the war as much as possible, but to be prepared to war as much as possible. So of course there are plans to defend the Israelis. But I don't see Israel initiate a preemptive attack in this sense. What the most probable scenario is a scenario, again, of action, reaction, that eventually will make our life here insecure and unbearable. And that way Israel, like in Gaza, like in 2006, will decide to defend its citizens. Another scenario, as you mentioned, may be a scenario of the involvement of Iran, the nuclear issue. Our assumption is that any attack, wide attack, let's put it this way, because there was an attack in Natanz, but any wide attack against the Iranian nuclear capabilities will end up in Hezbollah's rockets over here in northern Israel, and maybe further than northern Israel.
And I will add that Israel is developing a laser technology with the United States, which would be able not only to deal with more rockets simultaneously than the Iron Dome, but also quickly and a little more cheaper than an Iron Dome missile. And I think they're touching a very important point, because I also served in the IDF, and I know that when the Mossad or the IDF, whoever it is, want to attack Iranian facilities, they'll find a way. The bigger question and headache is the day after the attack, what response will there be? Where will it be? How will it be executed? So I think it's very important. Do you believe that any American negotiations with Iran should address the issue of Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Yes, definitely. Not Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah in the region. There is no Hezbollah in Lebanon anymore. There is Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah in Syria, Hezbollah in Iraq, and also a presence of Hezbollah in Yemen. So good luck to all of us. Yes, but you need to be sophisticated, because I'm not sure that if you will connect nuclear issue to Hezbollah, you will get anything. You will need to go in both routes, but not necessarily together. Okay, you will have to find a way to, and actually there is a way, because there are sanctions that are dealing with the nuclear issue, yes or no, doesn't matter, and there are sanctions that are dealing with supporting terrorism, and so there is a lot of tools to work with.
And does Israel feel they have the support of the international community to defend their borders against hostile groups such as Hezbollah or Hamas?
Yes, up to a specific point. And we've seen this in all Israeli operations in Gaza, and we've seen this in 2006. When there is collateral damage, the legitimacy of the Israeli operation is limited in time, until eventually we are told to stop. And we usually don't stop after we defeated the other side, but we stop kind of in the middle of the campaign, and they managed to preserve and even to strengthen their military capabilities. So even if there is a leverage, it's a limited leverage.
Which I just have to say, which makes it very, very difficult because of Hezbollah's tactic of hiding in civilian areas. And it's just, it's a very difficult situation. Go ahead, Benji.
Part of what we are doing in Alma is a simulation to small groups that bring them to become Israelis. And now they need to make decisions on these issues. And that way, when they are, facing this dilemma, right, they understand better how we think and how we feel and how we make decisions. Which I hope this kind of simulation, if more and more people will experience it, when there will be war, they will have better understanding of, as you said, of the challenge.
The next question brings us back to the Second Lebanese War with Israel in 2006. Back then, Hezbollah developed these nature reserves that they've utilized in the war. Given the technology, the Hezbollah experience fighting in Syria and other developments in the region, how has Hezbollah's tactics shifted over the years since 2006?
Greatly. Hezbollah became from a terrorist organization. I don't use the word organization anymore to describe Hezbollah, because it's a political party, it's a social movement, and it's an army. It's a terrorist army. And I think the major change is one, as I've explained, with the PGMs and the amount of artillery. And the other one is the fact that Hezbollah developed ground capabilities. In 2006, Hezbollah lost about a few hundreds of its combatants in the war, and they had very poor capability in fighting the IDF on the ground. Though what everybody thought about this war, including in Israel. But in the next war, we will be facing combatants that are experienced in a decade of war in Syria. and commando units that were established and trained by Iranians, and also we got some were cooperating in Syria with the Russians and adopting Iranian methods and Russian methods, and it's a completely different scenario. So in the next war, they will have also brigades that will be capable of crossing the border, or try to cross the border into Israel on the ground, and trying to transfer the battlefield to the Israeli side, something that actually didn't happen since 48.
Speaking of those advanced technologies such as PGMs, why can't Israel deal with the PGM facilities in Lebanon in the same fashion they deal with Iranian nuclear facilities in Iran?
You don't expect me to really answer this kind of question, right?
Fair enough. And also regarding Syria, we've spoken about Hezbollah as a proxy of Iran in Syria, but is there anything you can tell us about other pro-Iranian militia in Syria, particularly on Israel's border?
Yes, of course. We are now finalizing a report exactly on this topic, so I hope it will be published after Passover. We traced 36 Iranian proxy, not those who are coming outside of Syria, like the Afghanis Fatimiyun and the Pakistanis Ainabiyun and Iraqi Zehavi. No, I'm speaking about local Syrians, Sunni Syrians that are living there in the southern part of Syria next to the Israeli border. And they are already organic militias. Most of them are already organic militias that has like a local commander, and it's all about the bread and the money and the arms. And they were fighting against Iran, and today they are fighting with Iran, and they became loyal to Iran, and they are fighting against those who are still resisting the government. You know what? I want to show you something that maybe can shed a light to your question. You can see this is the Iranian Quds Force, and you have Unit 840, which carried out one of the attacks. But again, it's not an Iranian unit. It's an Iranian unit that used locals to carry out an attack against IDF soldiers a few months ago. And then you have 36 local militias. These are just example of the names of 2 out of the 36. El Arin also has a civilian association with the same name, with the same commander. Foreign militias like Fatimiyun, which are Afghanis that are based not only in the south, but mainly at the border with Iraq in El Mayadin, and Hezbollah with its units, and Syrian army, which has 2 units or 3 units, which also kind of connected to Quds Force, the first corps. And I'm saying corps, don't imagine a corps in the US Army, okay? It's less soldiers than that. But that's the name, the first corps, composed of few divisions. We don't know the exact size of this, but no doubt it is trained by the Southern Command Unit of Hezbollah, 4th Division, which is working with Quds Force, and Air Force Security, which is actually kind of a Shin Bet in Syria. There are many Shin Bets like this in Syria that is also coordinating with Quds Force. So that's the mess in south, and that's only the south. In southern Syria, not including the Russians here and UN, and ISIS, which is still active in some of the places there.
We definitely look forward to you publishing this report, and we will make sure to take a look at it and encourage our audience as well. And the next question is, are there any significant changes towards Lebanon since the Biden administration took over, and what do you anticipate?
Well, it seems to me, and again, I'm not an expert to the US, but as far as I see meetings and things that happening, it was not the first priority of Biden. So it's really too soon to tell. But Lebanon is in a very deep crisis. I know that Americans are usually asking me the question about what's the solution. I truly don't know. I truly don't know how this is going to end, because as I've said, many Lebanese are leaving, and we don't see that the Lebanese diaspora which is huge in the United States, getting back involved in the internal issues of Lebanon in a sense that makes a difference. That's very sad to say that, because I had a little bit of hope after the blast in Beirut in August that maybe this will happen. Because as I've said, all the local leadership in Lebanon, not only Hezbollah, is corrupted, and people know that. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
Right. I would just like to add here, we have dealt a lot with Lebanese expatriates, especially Christians. And at this point, they feel that the cronyism and the corruption and the takeover of the political establishment, the commercial establishment, and the military establishment is so entrenched in Lebanon that they feel, that it's almost futile, to do anything at all. And it's a very, very sad situation. Yeah. So I think we're coming to the end right now. Benjamin, are there any very important questions that still need to be answered while we have Sarit?
We have many more questions, and a lot of them are important. Just one last one I think that we would have time for is, what does Israel do with the tunnels after they discover them?
Oh, well, they blocked the tunnels almost completely. I'm saying almost completely because the one that you've seen was half blocked in a way that enabled visitors with the confirmation of the IDF. This is how we cooperate with the IDF. Delegations that are meeting me afterwards are going to the tunnel, and it's all this in the same area. But it's half blocked, and you can get, not even half the way, part of the way down the way you could see in my video, but they are blocked with cement, which is also kind of an engineering project. How do you block the tunnel with cement without creating any damage to any of the sides? In the first tunnel that was blocked with cement, the IDF didn't spare, and hundreds of trucks pumped cement into the tunnel, and then IDF visual intelligence could see the cement pumping out from the Lebanese side and actually flooding the nearby Shiite village, and you see Hezbollah operatives running away from the cement that was popping up from the tunnel, from the opening of the tunnel.
Excellent. Sarit, I cannot thank you enough for your incredible work. You're truly a Devorah up there. You're so courageous with your family of 5. I would like to recommend to all of our viewers to please support the wonderful work of Sarit Zehavi and the Alma Center. You could go to alma-israel.org, and there's a donate. There's a donate button right there. She does amazing work, and I'm very, very happy to be one of your donors and one of your friends. I'm honored. I'd also I was just reminded by someone to also donate to EMET, because we do feel very, very strongly that a well-informed public can create well-informed policymakers. So if you'd also like to give to emetonline.org, all of this costs us a great deal of money, and we really, really appreciate it very, very much. And I would also like to wish Sarit and all of our viewers in the United States and in Israel and also in Canada a wonderful Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a wonderful happy kosher Passover, and let's continue to be strong and go forth with the EMET, with the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope it will be the end of COVID with Passover, and we'll be free to go wherever we want.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarit. Bye-bye.
Thank you.